buys a bus to make losses or help Kenyans on the streets. It is an investment, probably funded by a loan which must be repaid. It's naive to expect them not to hike fares when they are carrying 40% passengers less. Why hasn't the government lowered fuel prices?
Matatu operators have been, informed about this. They have been urged by the government to try to be a bit more understanding, a bit more humane, so that they do not ask, much more from people who already have got, some of them are lost livelihood. They don't have livelihoods, and the discussion as to whether the government may have to rein in to be able to, to control the fares is a discussion that is ongoing, and it has not been made as yet, but is a consideration that is on the table. And indeed, if you remember what was issued recently by the National Treasury about lowering of certain prices and even in taxes. So yes, what he's saying really makes a lot of sense, and that is why the government also did ask banks, because some of these matatu and even buses are acquired through loans, and they're paying their loans. And the government went further and trying to talk to the banks to be able, not to penalize somebody who fails to pay, to service the loans as regularly as he perhaps used to do before. And therefore, the government is alive to this, and as to the fact, and whether taxes should be lowered or abolished entirely. Those are considerations that are being looked into. Yes.
Another question.
But remember also, the government also, any government operations is funded through taxes, and therefore, as to whether all taxes should be abolished, then the government would grant a halt. Yes. So what might have to be considered is, to strike a balance, a balance that takes into account that some livelihoods have been lost. Many businesses are not operating the same way they used to operate before, but also on the other side, that the government operations must continue to provide basic, services to our people. Health facilities must continue to be running, water, power, and on all other requirements. Right. So that balance has to be, to be found.
Another question: could the government spokesperson also address the issue of rent? Are we to expect to pay less rent, or is that also up to the landlords?
Again, I must also say that there are landlords that have been very, very understanding. I know this one in Nyahururu who said that he will not even ask, rent from his tenants for 2 months, and that, of course, was dependent on the fact that perhaps within 2 months, the issues, whatever situation we are in currently, would perhaps have gone back to normal. But again, you recall also that the government appealing to, the landlords to be understanding, to consider it, really, because it's realistic that some of these houses are all being acquired through mortgage, and therefore that appeal went beyond the landlords, even to the banks,
right.
To be able to understand that these are not normal situations. A normal situation, you cannot address them in a normal way, and therefore when somebody fails to pay rent, somebody fails to pay, to service, a mortgage, it is not because they don't want, it's because the situation has forced them to be that kind of circumstance.
Now there's fear that COVID-19 is going to spread more up-country to vulnerable people due to the high number of people traveling from there to urban centers. How does the government plan to manage up-country to urban travels, and indeed the reverse, urban to up-country travel?
There's an advisory that, well, not an advisory, but an appeal that was issued recently that everybody to stay where they are. If you are in an urban center, stay in urban centers. If you are in the rural areas, stay in the rural areas until the situation is brought under control. As of now, before any other stricter measures are introduced by the government, if at all that will happen, is that all of us must be disciplined enough and be able to, obey and practice what the government is saying. When we say that people should not, engage in a lot of traveling, it's just to protect ourselves and our neighbors and our families as well. So it is something that is said that is in good faith, that do not travel out of where you are, because then this disease is transmitted through body contact or through close proximity with somebody who is infected. And the surest way is to ensure that the person who is infected stay where they are, and therefore that reduces the chances of passing on to somebody else.
I said in my introduction that counties are now being asked to set aside 20 schools each for quarantine. Does it mean that the numbers might surge beyond the estimated 10,000 cases by the end of this month?
Those are projections.
Yes.
The projected numbers. It may not necessarily be true that we will get there, but we might just as well get there. the possibility of get there and perhaps the possibility of not there are more or less the same. Do we want to get there? No, nobody wants us to get there. But should we get there, if we do not obey the instructions and the directives and measures the government has put in place, we will perhaps require much more facilities than what we already have, because the facilities we have will certainly, in that kind of situation, will be overstretched, and therefore may require additional facilities. And that is why the government is thinking ahead, looking at various contingencies. Should we get to that point, then how should we prepare so that we are able to deal with those, who may eventually require to be isolated?
In other countries more developed than us, doctors who come into contact with COVID-19 patients contract the virus and in worst cases even die. How secure are medical workers?
We understand where they are. We understand that they're much more exposed than most of us, because they're the ones who are in the first line of defense.
Yes.
They're the ones who receive these cases when they come. And therefore, we must be able to incapacitate them in terms of training, but also in terms of equipment. And therefore, the government plans to ensure that each and every health worker has got equipment, has got sufficient training to give them the confidence to be able to deal or even to handle cases that that come before them. Well, as of now, for those that are we have fewer cases. Even 50 is not a lot of numbers, but if you get to 10,000, like has been projected by the Ministry of Health, then we'll have to, get literally everybody with a PPE, that is personal protective gear.
Right.
You know that right now in the global market, they are not necessarily very easily available, and what the government is trying to do is to ensure that this equipment, personal protective equipment, are manufactured locally. So discussions are ongoing with local companies to be able to manufacture them locally. And therefore, the time comes that we need them in large numbers, then they'll be readily available locally. But we understand the role and the environment under which our healthcare workers.
Yeah, we even had cases of nurses running away from patients initially, like the case in Kakamega and Agoslo at Mbagathi. Could it be that they felt less equipped to deal with the disease at the time, or were they just afraid of personal? For personal reasons.
Not just afraid, but see, what empowers someone is, first of all, is information. When you have the information, you are empowered to be able to, know which decisions to be made if you are confronted by a certain kind of situation. And therefore we are increasingly training them to ensure that they understand on, how to be able to deal and even to handle cases of COVID.
Right.
But beyond that, of course, this is something that no country had prepared for. Neither, major global economies of the world had not prepared for this.
Right.
And we must accept that even ourselves, it did not just catch us by surprise, but we had not prepared adequately for it at the initial stages. So increasingly we're getting, better and better, and we're training our healthcare workers to be able to know how to react and to respond to a case of COVID. But also beyond that, also giving PPE, personal protective equipment. Not just in Nairobi, but even at all the counties. Training of healthcare workers is not necessarily training that, we are not starting from ground zero. These are people who are already trained, and therefore what is being given to them is an adaptation, how to be able to handle these cases. We have had experience of dealing with Ebola when we went out to West Africa to help out there. So the experience is already there, but this is what happened basically is try to enhance their capacity so that they can be able to deal effectively with this new virus.
Now, as the cases rise and counties being asked to prepare 20 schools per county to accommodate those that will be found to have the virus, and with the curfew that was effected from Friday last week, is the country headed for a complete lockdown? We found out about that as we have this conversation with Colonel Retired Cyrus Oguna, the government spokesperson. He's our guest on the big conversation. Now, Colonel, with many people not working, yet living hand to mouth now, do we see a security problem in the country?
Well, right now we have not had any issues, but it's something that the government is, looking into. We realize that people are asking for a lockdown. That certain regions should have been locked down by now. But you see, locking down has got its own challenges and issues. the government must think seriously about, because if you look, let's say Nairobi, then you must make provisions of how you're going to provide for people. And if you don't, then it may actually just move from a health issue to a security issue.
Right.
The government is aware about that, and is making plans and making contingencies to be able to address any situation that may arise.